Well, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for all your friendship over the many, many years. I'm glad that Councilman Fedynsky is here, and of course Ingrid. She's not only the honorary consul, she's the Cleveland's ambassador to Lithuania. And as a lifelong Clevelander, I find it striking that the Ukrainian Cultural Garden is right across the street from the Lithuanian Cultural Garden. And I think that's really fitting, because in preparing for this appearance, I was struck, and I already knew, but I was struck at the many, many parallels between the Ukrainian community, Ukraine as a nation, the Lithuanian community, and Lithuania as a nation. As noted, who can not notice, Ukraine is in a desperate fight for not only its existence as an independent, free, democratic country, but also standing up for the international architecture, for the rule of law that has made prosperity and relative freedom and peace a commonplace over the last 3 generations since World War II. That's no longer a given. That's something that is a threat to the international order, and I have to just salute Lithuania for its overwhelming support for Ukraine. Wow. I was reading Paul Krugman's column in the New York Times the other day, and he said that Lithuania, relative to its GDP, is providing 6 times the support for Ukraine that the United States is. And not only is Lithuania providing material, military, diplomatic support, but the people of Lithuania have stood up to welcome thousands, tens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees. And I was reading recently that Sarūnas Marčiulionis and Arūnas Sabonis, Arvydas Sabonis, yeah. 2 legendary NBA players have taken under their wing some 15, 16-year-old Ukrainian boys to set up basketball camps, find them lodging, find them friends. The reason I know this is because they're famous. There are thousands and thousands of Lithuanians, ordinary citizens, who are doing the same thing. And I'll get to what our communities here have been doing and will be doing. But I mentioned the commonalities between the 2 peoples. You're celebrating the 106th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. And looking up, I noticed that Lithuania also declared independence March 1990, but it wasn't a new declaration, it was a renewal to demonstrate the continuity of Lithuania's existence as a country, and one that shares the same values that Ukrainians have: freedom, democracy, liberty, devotion to their culture, the church, something that Ukrainians cherish, and something that was taken from them, Ukrainians and Lithuanians, in the 19th century when the 2 countries, when the 2 nations were absorbed into the Russian Empire. And what does that mean? Russification, censorship, repression, and death. Ukrainians declared their independence January 22nd, 1918. Lithuania declared its independence 3 weeks later. This was in the wake of World War I, when people were asking, why are we fighting for the Tsar? Why are we fighting for Russia? We're not Russians. We want to cherish our own culture. And with the world in the midst of a world war, leaders seized the opportunity to declare their independence. Sadly, Ukrainians were not able to defend theirs. Lithuania was. However, and I'm just repeating what you already know, in 1939, Hitler and Stalin joined forces, joined hands, and Lithuania was brought back into Russian Empire as a Lithuanian Soviet Socialist Republic. To our credit as Americans, the United States never recognized that as a legal fact, but obviously had to recognize it as a historical fact. It was what was there. And Stalin, to suppress Lithuanian nationhood, did the same thing that he did in Ukraine. Mass arrests, deportations, installing a puppet government, and censorship, Russification, something that the councilman mentioned and which you're well aware of. Those of a certain age perhaps even remember that as a sad reality. Certainly many of your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents probably told you about that. Well, we're in the midst of a war now, but actually Lithuania and Ukraine took up arms in the midst of World War I. Many were, of course, forced into the Red Army, but the Union of Lithuanian Freedom Fighters took up arms against the Nazis and then fought the Soviets. The Ukrainian Insurgent Army, UPA, they fought. And it's interesting that in the midst of World War II, people were not, Ukrainians, were not fighting for the Soviet Union or for Stalin. They were fighting for their land after they found out that the Nazis were just as brutal and as the Soviets were, as the communists. And an interesting wrinkle in history, in the midst of World War II, Stalin formed the Soviet-Ukrainian Foreign Ministry. And in 1945, Ukraine was admitted as a charter member of the United Nations. Why? Because there were 100,000 Ukrainian freedom fighters in the Carpathian Mountains taking on divisions. And Stalin wanted to say, you don't need that. You're already an independent country. And of course, these, the Foreign Ministry and UN, those were hollow institutions with puppets. But the ambassador to the United States of Ukraine several years ago told me that when it was apparent that the Soviet Union was falling apart, diplomats from KU, from the Soviet Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, went to Moscow and wanted to see the documents that formed the Soviet Union so they would know how to dissolve it. Interesting story. And I haven't seen anything written about that. Well, the upshot for many of us, our parents, grandparents, was that to save their lives, to preserve their culture, they ended up in displaced persons camps, DP camps in Austria and Germany. I myself was born in Austria and came to America when I was 8 months old. And was immersed in the Ukrainian community, kind of based in the Tremont neighborhood, where we had our churches and still do, the mother church, St. Peter and Paul. And like many of you in your, I went to Ukrainian Heritage School, Saturday school, which I very much disliked. And you know, it was a blessing. We sent our kids, and our kids, they didn't want to go. Lev Kolchitsky. You didn't want to go, did you, Lev? What's it?
Missing the cartoon.
Yeah, exactly. Our son, he blames us for missing Little League baseball because of Ukrainian Saturday school. I was a member of the Ukrainian Scouting Organization. My wife is still active in that. Chris is one of the leaders. And in fact, now that Ukraine is independent, she's forged links with fellow scouts in Ukraine. Anyway, in 1948, the United States very generously opened its doors to Ukrainian, Lithuanian, Polish, Jewish, other refugees with the 1948 Displaced Persons Act. And I read the report from Congress, and it said that a lot of people were opposed to that, claiming that these refugees were degenerates who had no contribution to make to America. And I pointed out that at 8 months old, I was too young to be a degenerate. And the only contribution I made to America at the time was washed away with my diapers. Folks from the DP camps came here and established a very vigorous community. Not just Ukrainians and Lithuanians, but as the councilman pointed out, many ethnic groups, which is one of the strengths of Cleveland, which is reflected, as I mentioned, in our cultural garden, a unique chain of cultural facilities. Well, when you send a couple million people to a different country, that becomes a political force. And one of the things that we were taught was to support Ukraine. And how do you do that? You become a citizen. And one of the events that was and still is a July event is Captive Nations Week. It was signed by President Eisenhower in 1959. And the captive nations, and they included all of the Soviet-dominated, what we called at the time satellite countries, Poland, Romania, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, as well as those countries, those nations that were within the Soviet Union, including obviously Lithuania and Ukraine. And I remember reading, like in the Washington Post or New York Times, what a pipe dream that was. It's never happened, you know, this captive nations thing, and of course the Soviets were very outraged. But President Jimmy Carter very astutely named a Polish American, Zbigniew Brzezinski, to be his national security advisor. And he, as an immigrant himself, understood how vital, how important the captive nations in Central and Eastern Europe were to the eventual, what he believed, breakup of the Soviet Union. And that's what happened. The Soviet Union broke along those very same ethnic lines. And it wasn't just Jimmy Carter, it was Ronald Reagan, of course. And I remember I worked on Capitol Hill at the time. And Ronald Reagan's ethnic advisor in the White House was a Lithuanian American. I forget his name. Koyalis, yeah. And you didn't have to explain to him what the issue was, what the stakes were. And it was at that time, and I can't put my finger on it because it's lost in time, that I became friends with people like Fedynsky, became friends with Ingrid Bulis, Aldous Ursinus, Ramanta Saxiolis, etc., and those that were mentioned who are no longer with us. Now, the captive nations, that wasn't just a demonstration. Supporting dissidents wasn't just kind of an idle gesture. It had practical implications. The United States Congress, at the request of every administration, would pass a bill for the Board of International Broadcasting, Voice of America, Radio Liberty. And so, while there were dissidents in Lithuania, the group Sąjūdis, in Ukraine it was Ruch movement, people would gather around their radio, listen to shortwave, and find out that there was a demonstration in downtown Cleveland in support of the captive nations. They would then convey that to the dissidents in the Gulag, to let them know you're not forgotten, to let them know. And gradually, and then suddenly, the Soviet Union began to fall apart. And I mentioned how I'm struck by the commonalities between Lithuania and Ukraine. January 21st, August 23rd, 1989, 3 months before the fall of the Berlin Wall, 2 million people from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania held hands and formed a human chain across those three countries. Half a year later, Ukrainians did the same from Lviv to Kyiv. Lithuanians declared renewal of their independence in March. Ukrainians had to wait another year and a half. The Soviets greeted Lithuanian independence renewal with brutality. Gorbachev, winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, sent in troops who killed 14 Lithuanians in Vilnius and wounded dozens. Over the years, our work as Americans, lobbying, petitioning our government as guaranteed in the Constitution, won us many, many champions here in Ohio. And I wrote down names of Frank Laushi, Congressman Michael Feehan. He was on the Judiciary Immigration Subcommittee that wrote the DP laws that allowed us to come to America. He was a Cleveland congressman. Charlie Vanek, Senator Howard Metzenbaum, Senator John Glenn, my boss, Mary Rose Okar, today Marcy Kaptur, others. George Voinovich lived in this very neighborhood. And I was privileged to work with him in his administration in the 1980s when Cleveland was really in the dumps. And we built the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Science Center, stadiums, etc. That was the White administration. But Voinovich would come to Washington and say, I need $10 million for this, I need $5 million for that. And Mary Rose and Lou Stokes would deliver often, not always. And he was confronted with environmental issues, and Cleveland had those. Those of you old enough will remember the pollution that came from the steel mills and so on. And the EPA administrator was Valadampkis, a refugee who went from the DP camps, came to, I think, Chicago, worked in an auto plant, and then got a MA or PhD or whatever, university, and became the Region 5 administrator for EPA. And I remember George Voinovich telling me, Andy, I'm so glad Lithuania became independent. That's the only way we can get rid of Valadampkis to make him president of Lithuania. And he said that jokingly, of course. He was very proud of his friendship and relationship, not just with Valadampkis, but with, as a member of the Foreign Relations Committee and a resident of this neighborhood. He understood the issue as well as anybody. Well, okay, we're 2 years into the war coming this Saturday. The war began February 24th, 2022, and as many point out, actually it began in 2014 when Putin started a rebellion in aggression in the Donbas region and annexed Crimea. He then was bold enough, Putin, to invade Ukraine. And according to his thinking, the war would last no more than a week. He had his troops have parade uniforms in their backpacks with the expectation that he would be presiding over the annexation of Ukraine and installing a puppet government and no doubt executing President Zelensky. The United States warned Ukrainian military that the plan was to fly in troops to a military airport outside of Kyiv with a 30-mile column of troops to then occupy the rest of Ukraine. To the world's astonishment, and to, frankly, the our astonishment, Ukraine anticipated what was going to happen. There were horrendous atrocities in Bucha, but now we're 2 years into it.